Welcome to the speaker series on a shot glass of recovery.
Yeah. You get a house, you get a car, then you start thinking that's all you are, but you don't know the truth. So let me spell it out for you. Now I got your attention, now there's a start. Now sit and listen to my favorite part. Life's been giving us some clues. The answer lies inside of you.
I am Lisa, the host of A Shot Glass of Recovery, and this is our speaker series. Let's sit back and get ready for some more experience, strength, and hope.
Hi, everybody. My name's Gail, and I am an alcoholic. I'm very, very grateful to be here tonight, grateful to be sober. Yeah, I'm just really grateful that I landed on this meeting not too long ago, actually by mistake. And I have to say that I don't think I've ever felt more welcome, from the day that I walked into this meeting accidentally. And I can get to that here. And God is just so good. And I just want to say that I have a spiritual story. I have that's all I have is I have a spiritual message. And it wasn't anything that was planned. It was just something that happened to me in my life and in my journey. My sobriety date is May the 16th of 1998. And for that, I'm very, very grateful. Yeah, it's just an amazing journey that I've got to live on and be on. And, just to beginning in a general way, what I was like, what happened and what I'm like now, I have to admit that I'm not the same person that I used to be. I'm not sure how to explain all of that. I just know that it's quite spiritual for me. Left to my own devices, I would still be drunk. So, I grew up in a family. I had a mom and a dad, and I had a grandma and a grandpa. We had flowers in the yard. I could smell them on Sunday, and the colors were really bright. And I had a hula hoop, and I had jacks, and I had Barbie dolls, and we had a really cool life. We had carpet on our floors, and that was probably a pretty good idea because we swept a lot of stuff underneath it. We had a beautiful house outside and a white picket fence, and Dad mowed the grass. And I used to love the sound of the wash machine on a Saturday. We lived in a peaceful environment. I had a older sister, and I was the baby of the family. They always called me the baby of the family. And I want to say that I believe that my alcoholism started long before I ever picked up a drink. And what I mean by that is first grade, Mrs. Wendell, I was scared to death of her, full of fear of this woman for absolutely probably no reason until I don't know. I just grew up in fear, and I don't know why that was. I didn't live in a hostile home. I don't know if my dad was alcoholic or not, but I do know that my dad drank, and I used to find empty bottles under the seats and, in the bathroom but I never seen my dad drunk. He was not a belligerent man. He was not angry man. He took very good care of us, and he worked hard. My mom was definitely a candidate of Al-Anon. Our house was spotless. And it was only because my mother never stopped doing those things for us. My clothes were all made. She made everything by hand. It was she was a beautiful woman. And there was a particular time, and I'll tell you that my alcoholism began, my first drug of choice was lying. I lied about everything to everybody, about everyone. And it all began, I think, here more than ever, is I had a brother, Steve. He was like 18 months older than me, but we were very tight. And then we had the three older ones. My brother, Charles, was on his way home from Moorhead University, and I was in the 7th grade, and Steve was in the 8th. And there was a knock at the door. It was Mother's Day. And there was a knock at the door, and the police officer said, your son won't be coming home anymore. And there was one. And what I mean by that is there's check one. If you had my life, you'd probably drink too. If your brother was killed in a car accident, you would probably drink too. And if your mom laid in a fetal position for 2 or 3 years after that, you'd probably drink too. See, I used those things for a long time, the blame game, if you had my life. So I grew up and I'll never forget they come to our high school. I don't remember my mom and dad saying, "Hey, you want to go to college or, become something." I'm sure that they did. I was very active in school. I was a cheerleader, I was a baseball, softball player. I loved school. I loved people. My dad would say, "Gail, you're just like a chameleon." And he was so right because by the time I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't even know what my favorite color was. It was whatever you wanted it to be, and whatever you wanted to eat, I would eat. I was such a chameleon, but I got along with everybody, and I really believe that it was a quality that I had that made me popular. So anyway, I graduated high school. I did not go to college. I raised my hand one day and they said, "Who wants to go work for the FBI?" And I said, "I do." And I signed up and I went to work for the FBI in Washington, D.C. And that's when my party began, and I met people just like me. And it was just pretty wild and crazy. But I had a boyfriend back here in Ohio and he loved me and I loved him. And a few years into that, he called me up. He said, "Please come home. I miss you." And I resigned from the FBI. I was so immature, so immature. And I resigned. I came home, and not too long after that, I become pregnant. I do everything half backwards, and I become pregnant. And we decide to marry, and my dad says, "Gail, you don't have to marry this man," but and I did, and I had a beautiful son. My son, whenever I speak of my children, I do get a big lump in my throat because my children play a big part of not only my active alcoholism, but also my recovery. God is so good. God is so good. So anyway, I come back and I have this son. His name's Jeremy, and he is just the apple of my eye to this day. It does not matter how old your kids get. He is still my boy. And I knew that my husband wasn't coming home from work on time. He wasn't doing this and he wasn't doing that. And if you had my life, you would probably drink too. So anyway, I was blaming him for all of these things and it's all his fault and da da da. And I knew the solution, I heard that if you just have another child, maybe then he'll come home. So of course, then this alcoholic thinking, I had no sponsor, no God, no nothing. And just me. Can you imagine just me in charge? So I mean, I have this beautiful daughter. Her name is Valerie, and I will tell you, I've got some very stunning, stunning children. So anyway, life goes on. I've got these two kids, and he's still not coming home. He's still not coming home. And I call my mom. My mom since moves to Fort Myers, Florida, geographical cure because my brother died. And so my dad takes her down there to heal. And I called my mom and I said, "Dad, he's just not coming home and he's just not doing this." And mom says, "Well, why don't you come to Florida?" And I said, "Oh, wow, that sounds so wonderful. The ocean, the beach, the sand. It's going to be so nice when we get to Florida." So we packed up these two pillows and a suitcase and got on that Greyhound bus and see, I was eligible. My life was eligible when the food stamps came. My life was eligible when the low income housing project became available for me and my children. So we got to move in this brand new apartment complex and the sheets were clean. My daughter had strawberry shortcake and Jeremy had Batman and Robin and the sheets were clean and they were clean until they weren't anymore. And see, what happened was I took me from Ohio to Florida and nothing about Gail had changed. And I began to pick up here and there. I started drinking when I worked for the FBI, just here and there, party. It was no fun, or a lot of fun, no consequences. But as I noticed and I look back, from the very first time I took that first drink of alcohol, my life began to deteriorate. And I truly believe in the progression of this disease. I end up moving down to Florida and I live in that low income housing project. And like I said, your life's manageable when the medical card came and you take your kids to the dentist. I'm living in here. I'm paying $16 a month. I get a job working for the Lee County Courthouse because I've got a resume that says I work for the FBI and I have to have a him, and I meet a him and him is awesome. He's a criminal lawyer. I needed him. for a couple things in Florida. So he became my higher power for sure. And I hope surely not to offend anybody with this, but my disease progressed and it progressed. And I was introduced to this white powdery substance that they put on the back of dirty toilet seats, and you roll up a dollar bill and you snort it up your nose, and you become useless. And you do things that you wouldn't normally do. And that progressed into me being an intravenous drug user. My children would come knock on the door, and they would knock on the bathroom door, and I'd say, I'll be out in a minute. I'll be out in a minute. And the minutes became hours, and the hours became days, and the sheets were dirty. And I can remember putting Jeremy to bed at night, and I would say, Jeremy, I love you. He'd say, I love you more. I say, I love you more because I'm bigger. And it was always one of the most beautiful things I remember with my son. I don't have a whole lot of memory of my daughter. I do remember her saying, Mom, will you brush my hair? And I'd say, just put it up in a ponytail and go to school. Well, but I got holes in my socks. Just push them under and just put your shoes on. I was becoming very useless, and I remained useless for a really long time. And I'd like to say that I would call myself dead woman walking. And it took me a really long time to meet you all. And so I'm in Fort Myers, Florida, and life is still the same, and my disease is progressing, and I'm losing jobs, and I'm getting evicted, and the food stamps are coming, and that's life is manageable. And I walk out on the steps one day. I hadn't answered my phone, I couldn't look at my mom and dad. My mom lost her son. Look at me. What, poor me, poor me. And I remember that dad getting out of that big yellow station wagon one day with the wood down the side, and he gets out of it and he's walking towards me, that low income housing apartment. And he walks towards me, goes, Gail, your mom needs you. And I said, well, what does she need now? Your mom needs you. Well, what does she need? She needs you. Your brother was killed last night in a car wreck, so she needs you. Well, if you had two brothers that were killed in a car wreck, you'd probably drink too. If you lived in a low-income housing project and depended on food stamps, you'd probably drink too. If you had my life, promise you would drink too. If your mother laid in a fetal position for 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 years because she lost her family and you had survivor guilt, you would probably drink too. And that's exactly what I did. My disease progressed. My brother comes down. I had another brother. People still say, how many brothers do you have? I still get confused. It's been years. I still get confused. And my brother comes down to Florida, and he said, Gail, you need to come back to Ohio. And I said, yeah, you're right. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, seasons. I looked at Jeremy, say, hey, Jeremy, we get to wear rubber boots, man. We get some gloves and a scarf to wear around your neck, and we're going to go sled riding, and Santa Claus is coming to town. And we moved back. We took that Greyhound bus. We came back here, and there we are, ready to start a new life. And there I am. There I am. Nothing about me had changed. My brother said, Gail, you can stay here, until you get your feet on the ground. People would always say, till you get your feet on the ground. And that's when I began my cycle, I guess, of some treatment facilities. Maybe I do have a little problem here. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. Maybe the creditors are on me. Maybe I need a place to live. Maybe. Just maybe. I had no clue of really who I was, what I was, and where I was. Anyway, I ended up going through many, many facilities, 1, 2, 3, 4, inpatient, outpatient, and I got the coin, and I got the book, and I got the direction, but did I follow? No, and here's my story is I just really wasn't done. I just wasn't done till I was done. And I think God had a part in all of those things too. So now, I've got these 2 kids. I'm back here. I'm getting jobs. I'm losing jobs. I'm getting evicted. I'm going into treatment. And finally, it's May of some particular year. I really don't know. I haven't had a hymn in a while. I've got these 2 kids. If you were a single parent, you'd probably drink too. And you got evicted again. And I'm at the beach, East Fork Lake, and I see a man down there. He's sitting by himself, and and your life's manageable if you bring your kids to the beach on a Sunday, and bring the sunscreen and make sure that they don't get burnt, and I waved at him and he waved at me, and that was in May of one particular year, and he scooted down and I scooted down, and we got married, in July, and so that's 2 months I knew him, and don't kick me out of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I'll tell you, I remember I took him home and to meet my family and this and that, and this was a good man in my life, and my grandmother, Gail, do you know who that is? And I said, well, I recognized him from somewhere because I knew we knew each other years ago, but no. And my grandmother said, well, you just married your cousin. So yes, I did. I married my cousin, and I'm not from Kentucky. And so now you drink too if you married your cousin. So there you go. It wasn't too long after that. I was blessed with a beautiful daughter. You guys got to go on my Facebook page. Check out my daughters. My daughter looks just like us. Everywhere I'd go, my people would say, you look just like your dad. And then they'd say, you look just like your mom. And I remember my daughter coming home from school one day, wanting to do that family tree thing. I said, oh, shoot, that'll be easy. It just goes straight up, So there you go. That's part of my story. But, life, I just have a brain that's just twisted. There's just something not right about me, right? But, life, God is so good to me. He accepted me for just who I am. And he's given me this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful life. I've got 4 children, and the next thing you know, I get this opportunity to rent this house over in Kentucky, and I move over to Kentucky, and the next thing you know, my little girls are knocking on the bedroom door going, and I'm like, I'll be out in a minute, I'll be out in a minute, and the minutes became hours, and the hours became days, and there I was again. There I was again, dead woman walking, loser. I hated Mondays. That's when they called. That's when the electric got turned off. That's when the phone was gone. That's when it was. The 4 horsemen. And I remember one particular day, it was in May of 1998, and I was sitting at the bottom of the steps, and I'm like, God, please help me. And guess what? There was a divine intervention. I stopped off at the psych ward. I got a little brown paper bag of some pills, and they gave me, and I ended up in this place called the Women's Recovery Addiction Program called the Rap House in Covington, Kentucky on Madison Avenue. And this is why I'm going to cry. I lived on the very top bunk. I forget my room number, but I was on the top bunk, and this woman come up one day and she said, you need to get in group. And I said, well, I can't get in group. I said, because I've had a little accident here. I can't get in group. And she said, well, you need to get in group. So anyway, this woman came up, and I ended up, long story short, I went to group. And hopefully that was my last treatment facility. And I met this woman, and she said, get in group. And I want to share this to everybody. That was Stacy that's chairing this meeting tonight, that I found accidentally on this meeting, that lives in Florida 28 years later. I mean, how does that happen? And I love her, and she knows I do, and that's that. So anyway, life goes on, and I get to graduate, on Thursday, and my sponsor, I got a lady, her name's Nancy D. I grabbed a hold of her ankle, where I was sitting on the steps. I said, will you please be my sponsor? Incomprehensible demoralization, desperate, whatever it takes. Please be my sponsor. I'll do whatever you say. I'm willing, man, please. See, something had changed in me. I became present in my alcoholism. I knew what I was doing. The food stamps didn't matter anymore. It didn't matter that the rent was paid. It didn't matter I had a job. None of that mattered. I'm still a loser. And something needed to change. And I grab a hold of this lady, and she says, just get up off your and work the 12 steps. And I got up, and I remember the first time when I did my 4th and 5th step with her. First, I did my 3rd. I turned my will in my life. Take it. You can have it. I don't want it anymore. It's too heavy for me to carry. I surrender. Take it all. And he did. And I met with my sponsor to share my 5th step, and I remember there was no burning bush. And I put it in reverse, and I backed out of the car and out of her driveway, and I said, wow, first time I'd ever been totally honest with another human being in my entire life. And I learned when I backed out of that driveway that I had the ability to be honest. And I became honest with her, and she carried me through the steps, and I changed. I became a different person. I became that little girl, that long-haired little dark. I had long black hair when I was born, and and God, He born me to be useful to you and to others, and to Him, and that's what He put me on this earth to do. And alcohol and other related substance took all that away from me and stripped me from who He created me to be, and He gave me freedom to come back to you. And He molded me into what He always wanted me to be. And I said to God, what is it I got to do? What do I got to do? He said, just stay sober. To stay sober, He said, just be useful to me and to others. I said, you got to deal. You got to deal. And I started living life. You know, my sponsor dropped me off at this place called Robke Chevrolet. I know Stacy will remember this. It was right on Madison Avenue. And I said, well, where do I work? She said, work here. I said, okay. So I said, okay, I'll work here. And I go in. I said, you hiring anybody to clerks or anything? And I'm still in the facility. And they said, no, but we're hiring salespeople. I said, oh, okay, two-door cars, four-door cars. I can do this. I can sell cars. So I got to sell cars, and I said, yay, I can sell cars. And that began my selling career. And God is so good. And I will tell you that when I moved to that place over in Kentucky that I was able to rent, I came from a tent. You know, I had 4 kids and 2 dogs and a ferret, and we're at the tent. And my son's 21 years old, and he said, "Mom, I'm going to go live with them." And my daughter's 15. She says, "I'm going to go live with him." And they left me at that East Fork Lake campground. My address was Loop 2, you know. And I got this opportunity, and I got this opportunity in sales, and I'm doing the deal. You know, how do you do this? You practice the principles in all your affairs. You trust God. You go to meetings. You just don't drink. I had fingernail polish on. I wore long dresses. I combed my hair. You know, I dressed like my sponsor. She taught me how. She taught me how to do it. You know, she taught me how to do it. And I said, I'm going to do whatever you tell me to do. And I did. And I did the 90 and 90. And I did the steps. I prayed all the time. And the reason why I prayed is because I know for a fact that I got to experience a divine intervention. I was in that facility and I was reading this page, and it was like, my name is Gloria Gail Greger. I was born May 3rd, 1956. This is what you did to me, and this is what I did to you. And I remember after that meeting, I stood up and I asked my lady friend over here, I said, are my feet on the floor? And at that particular moment, I had a spiritual experience, and every bit of those 10,000 pounds were lifted off my shoulders. I started this job in sales, and it wasn't long after that I got that cute little apartment, and we're flipping burgers on Sundays. My son's coming over. We got mustard and ketchup, man. We got clean sheets. We got clean sheets. You know, we've got Dawn dishwashing. We use it for the dishes and not everything else. You know, everything was just beautiful. Life is good, you know, and I'm working and I'm becoming a part of the community. And I'm praying every day. And all of a sudden I get this other job, and I go into this place, and this older gentleman, he said, well, I've never hired a woman salesperson before. You got any experience in sales? I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, you got any experience in camping? And I knew then that God had a sense of humor, and He hired me, and I became His first woman salesperson to sell recreational vehicles. And I retired from that job. And all it was boiled down to was practicing the principles on my affairs and going to meetings and staying sober and trusting God. You know, my daughter had met this little boy when she was 14, and he rode her around on the bicycle, and she ended up moving in with his family because I didn't take care of my daughter, and she moved in with his family, and they just celebrated 21 years of marriage, you know, and that's a God thing, man. That God just molded them in together, and He gave them a beautiful life. They're successful, and I have 2 beautiful grandsons by them. My daughter, 16 years old, she comes home, and I said, how'd you do on that SAT? I didn't do very good, but I passed the EPT. You know, how do you do this? You know, my daughter's 16. She's going to have a baby. You know, and it's like, well, how do you do this, Nancy? She said, you do it one day at a time, Gail. You do it one day at a time. So I became a grandma, you know, to a 16-year-old daughter, and his name is Nolan. Nolan's my grandson. He's the apple of my eye, and I am his biggest enabler. I'll admit it. So there you go. The other thing is my other daughter ended up giving me another granddaughter. My other granddaughter, all three of my daughters had babies the same year. So I have three 18-year-olds of this year that graduating high school. So it's all good. The next thing you know, I've got these grandbabies and I've got dogs and I don't have a him, I love my dogs. My mom or my daughter ends up marrying this man and I said to Nancy, how do you do a wedding? She said, you just do it one day at a time, Gail. And I ended up having this sit down wedding with over 300 people at the sit down dinner. And Nancy led us in prayer. Nancy led us in prayer. My beautiful, beautiful sponsor. So anyway, after that, my son, he's like, I'm going to get married too, Mom. I said, good. I don't have to pay for that one. And we get out on the dance floor and we're slow dancing, after the wedding. And I said, Jeremy, I love you so much. He said, I love you more because I'm bigger. And see, he remembered me saying that to him when he was just a little boy. And so God has been really, really good to me. I've got 6 wonderful, wonderful grandchildren. My mom called, at that time when I was selling those RVs and she sounded sad. And I told my boss, I said, I'm going to get in the car. I'm going to go down and see my mom in Fort Myers, Florida. And I got down there and I walked in her front door and I saw my mom sitting on the couch and I decided that I was going to stay there and help my mom do whatever I could do. And I remember the day I was taking her down the hallway in her wheelchair, and she turned around and looked at me. And I promise you, ladies, it was the first, and men, it was the first time I ever seen my mom's eyes in over 25, 30 years. And she saw her daughter for the first time, and I saw my mother. And I was able to stay there making a living amends to my mom. And she said to me, Gail, that lady that comes here and washes my hair, it kind of hurts. And that physical therapy lady, man, she hurts my ankles. What am I going to do without you? And I said, you won't have to. I stay. And I stayed there until my mom passed. And I ended up driving back to Cincinnati. And on the way back, all the people in Alcoholics Anonymous was calling me and my other friends outside of AA. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I said, oh, please don't be sorry. I just got to experience the greatest gift that any human being that ever would want to experience. And that was caring for my mother. My mother lost her sons. And I was able to be there for her and care for her until the day that she passed. And that's all a gift of Alcoholics Anonymous and a gift of sobriety. And just so many wonderful things. I have to get 2 big dogs. I got 2 English Mastiffs and they grew to be old and they've passed. I now have 2 mutts, whatever you want to call them. And I hope that they grow old and they're just my everything. I could talk forever. I retired from the RV industry. I started going to school. I graduate college in May at age 70. Yay. I don't know what I'm going to do. It doesn't matter. I only know that God is good. God is good. And I want to tell you, there was a time when I really certainly believed that God could and would if he were sought. And now I know that he will. I don't have to guess anymore. I know that he will because I trust and believe. And I need to remind myself of that on a daily basis. You see, I need to do the things that I don't want to do and don't do the things that I want to do. And that really helps me in my sobriety. I just have a wonderful life today. I have jacks. I play jacks now. I'd love to learn how to hula hoop again. I got Barbie dolls. The whole deal. I still like the sound of the wash machine, and life is just really, really good. It's peaceful in my home. I got a lot of people that love me. Pam is one of my BFFs that's on this meeting right now, and I love her, and she knows how much I do. She lives down the street from me. We care for each other in many different ways. I got to meet Karen on the meeting and Charlene and so many wonderful people, and Stacy, you have no idea, but to be welcomed like I have been in this program, I do want to tell you something real quick. I got to do it. Pam. I got to do it. So this man comes into Alcoholics Anonymous. He says to his sponsor, hey, I've been writing this song about AA. And the song says, well, sponsor